So the big burning questions, right? The things that we need to address and what we're going to try to cover today are, why does Microsoft have multiple cloud VDI solutions, right? It is probably the #1 most pressing concern and question that we hear all the time. The next question, and we'll get into this one a little bit too, is do I have to go all in with one or the other? And I think there's a lot of misconceptions around how we can approach cloud VDI to best meet the needs of our users, and we don't always have to go with a one-size-fits-all model. So there's a lot to explore there as well. Deployments, how do, right? So there's some vast differences between the two technologies in terms of how are we going to actually get these things up and running? What is the user experience and how does it compare across the two? Total cost of ownership, right? This is probably my favorite place to play, just because I've seen some wild numbers. I've taken some drastic steps, and I have actually seen optimized to zero used at least once, where we've driven down the cost of ownership so much that the product was unusable. So then we wanted to talk a little bit about management as well, and kind of fitting things into the existing structures that we already have, or do we need to bolt more things on? So those are the big burning questions. Hopefully we'll get through that. Hopefully we'll be able to have some time as well for some Q&A at the end. But let's talk a little bit about positioning statements for both of these two technologies. Some of these are Microsoft official marketing material slides. So you'll actually see these if you go to the Microsoft.com website. But if we look at how these two things are positioned, how they're structured, Azure Virtual Desktop, the Cloud VDI, is positioned to run flexibly, right? You do any configuration that you want to do with it. You can run Citrix or VMware inside of Azure to host machines, to present them out to users. It's consumption-based licensing, whereas Windows 365 was actually born with the name Cloud PC, right? And that's the thought there, is it's your Cloud PC. It is your persistent, always on, always available desktop as a service. It's simple to deploy, it's quick, it's scalable, and it's intended to be just kind of your one-stop shop for getting users in and up and productive as quickly as possible. Now, this is probably one of those slides that if you're doing screenshots, you might want to grab this one too. Looking at the actual features and capabilities between them, there's a lot of overlap, right? There are actually 4 different models that we can look at, and if we want to get really nuanced, there's probably a million other different ways that we can break down these things too. But generally, in the Azure Virtual Desktop space, we're looking at personal computers that are one-to-one. The user gets a VM assigned to them in Azure or automatically deployed to them in Azure. They use that machine and that machine is theirs, right? Then we have pooled or multi-session machines where there's a single VM, but we're allowed to oversubscribe it a little bit, allow several users to use chunks of that machine for periods of time. That functionality, that methodology supports an auto-scaling technology that isn't present anywhere else in Microsoft's Cloud VDI stack. Then there's Windows 365 Enterprise, for which you need to have Azure Active Directory and Intune, and then it all just sort of takes care of itself. It's all bundled up here. And then there's the Windows 365 Business, which is the lightest touch, easiest to deploy. Basically, user acquires a license and has a machine and they just go, right? So we're going to talk about some of these differences, some of the functionality that exists between them, and some of the use cases and how we might target these things. What I will call out, though, is as you're looking through this list, when we're talking about the VM stock keeping units up here, note that if you have GPU requirements, you're going Azure Virtual Desktop, at least for those users. If you have app or MSIX app attach requirements, you're going Azure Virtual Desktop. If you need to be present on literally every Azure geography on the planet, you're also looking at Azure Virtual Desktop, right? So there's a few things that might kind of force you into one bucket or the other, but rather than worrying about those things in particular detail right now, let's talk about